some more people joining. All right, well, maybe I quickly start off. Thank you all for joining our third lecture series of this year, 10 perspectives on the city and its architecture. So today we have the third perspective brought to us by David Gersten. And I will leave it to Patrick to introduce David in a kind of more detailed way. But I wanted to say hi, and I wanted to also let you know that in 2 weeks we will have our next lecture, which is by Aura Melis. She's an interior architect and landscape architect who works with Inside Outside, a Dutch firm working globally with a lot of architecture offices. So they have they provide a lot of interesting, very creative insights to other officers who might also be creative, but in a different way. So there's a lot of collaborations there. That's in 2 weeks. Today, first, we have a very exciting lecture by Mr. David Gersten. We're very honored to have him here calling him from New York, where it's early morning. So please, Patrick, take the floor and introduce David and run the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Inga. Good evening and good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to CUHK's public lecture of fall 2021. My name is Patrick Huang, chair of the Teaching and Learning Committee at the School of Architecture. Tonight, I have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker, David Gersten. Professor Gersten is an artist, architect, and writer based in New York City. He's an expert in drawing and education and an advocate for spatial literacy. He's particularly interested in the transformative power of collective and collaborative learning and designing. He has taught for decades at the Cooper Union and has served as the Associate Dean of the School of Architecture with the legendary John Haydock, for which he has studied under in the 1980s and 90s. He has also taught design studios and interdisciplinary workshops in Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, China, Denmark, and across North America. Currently, he is the director of interdisciplinary learning at the Cooper Union, dedicated to bridging the 3 disciplines at the school: art, architecture, and engineering. Professor Gersten is also the founding president of Arts, Letters, and Numbers, a nonprofit arts and education organization dedicated to expanding the terrain and experiences of learning. It is a place committed to the creative exchange across a wide range of disciplines, including architecture, visual arts, theater, film, music, the humanities, the sciences, and the social sciences. Professor Gersten's work includes buildings, drawings, stories, essays, films, performances, and constructions. And his works has showcased in exhibitions and performance spaces and are held in the collection of the Canadian Center for Architecture, the New York City Public Library's print collection, and many private collections. On a more personal note, over the summer, I have taken a 2-month workshop with David, which he calls Sonship Thesis. In Sonship, David created a space for conversation between the participants, where he crafted a culture of listening, a slowing down of time to enable a geography of questions. From that experience, I got a glimpse into David's way of teaching and the setting of a kind of ethos for making connections and linkages between learners of diverse backgrounds and geographic locations. So for me, every Tuesday and Thursdays between 9 p.m. to midnight was an incredible moment of intellectual illumination. At a time when higher education is hamstrung by administrative and bureaucratic activities and constraints, knowing there are still people like David interested in the transformative pursuit of evolving knowledge through education is truly a blessing. So with that short introduction, please join me in welcoming Professor David Gersten.
Hi, everybody. Wow. Wow. It's so great to see you all. Thank you all for coming. It is a real honor and a pleasure to be with you. I want to thank the School of Architecture at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And of course, I want to thank Patrick Wang for inviting me to speak with you all today. And also, Patrick, thank you so much for that very generous and kind introduction. I'm quite excited about today. I've been thinking quite a bit about what I could bring to this opportunity to speak with you. I've been thinking about architecture, I've been thinking about education, about the relationships between our questions, how they evolve, and our spaces of education, and the relationships between space and education, and in some ways, the importance of curiosity in all of this, in our lives, in our works. Curiosity, you know, we can think of curiosity as a kind of natural force, let's say, something like gravity. It has a kind of pull like gravity does, but this is curiosity is a pull that grows within us, and perhaps between us, between us and each other, and between us and the spaces that we're in, between us and the place that we are. Now, I say place because if we slow down and we think of our studios, right, whatever kind of studio that is, the architecture studio, painting studio, music studio, right, there's a lot of different kinds of studios. If we think of them as sites, like in architecture, we use the word site. We think of them as a site of exploration. See, the word site comes from situation, a situation. So when I'm talking about a site of exploration, this includes the spatial and the physical, but the situation of the site also includes the people that you're in conversation with, and the questions that you can ask each other, and all of the emotions and all of the memories that make up a place, right? They commingle between the sort of physical environment and the human environment. So in this sense, we can see our spaces of education as both physical, right? We have physical rooms, we have embodied experiences in these rooms, and they're of course also human, meaning they're material and they're emotional. And in some ways, our spaces of education are largely constructed of our questions, of each one of us and what we're curious about. So I often think that in our studios, we can find ourselves inhabiting our questions. In architecture, we talk about inhabitation a lot. In fact, you could say that architecture is the anticipation of inhabitation. That applies both to the architecture itself, the buildings, the chair anticipates the person sitting in it, but also the architect is anticipating inhabitation, right? You sit and you imagine future inhabitants. And so I've spent quite a bit of time working on the idea that spaces of education allow us to inhabit our questions. Now, I often think of questions really as the most transformative instruments in the world. Questions transform. They transform us, they transform the world. Now, some of the greatest questions, they may not fit into language. Or I should say, they may not start with language, right? They may not begin with a formed sentence of a question. Some of the greatest questions, we feel them. We sense them, we sense them in our gut, as they say. We feel a kind of pre-linguistic curiosity with our body. And these questions, like I mentioned gravity earlier, right? They pull us, right? They create a kind of gravity on their own of urgency that in fact draws us forward into our lives and into creating, a creative life. The way in which you have a creative life is by being drawn forward. And then as we draw out our curiosities, right? We draw them out into the world, right? We start to make things. Now, of course, the specific situation or site within which we're exploring our curiosities, this has a profound impact on our lives and on the life of the questions, right? The way a question evolves and transforms is really in conversation with the specific situation or site that people are asking them in. This is why I believe the spaces of education are some of the greatest architectural questions we can face. So tonight, I want to share with you four specific projects. Each one of them, in different ways, speaks to what I'm calling the architectonics of curiosity. Okay, now I am going to share my screen. Okay. Can you see an image? Great. I'm going to start with a project that we did in Denmark in 2012. This is a project called the Ahus Arc. Aarhus is a city in Denmark. And this was done at the Aarhus School of Architecture. It was a drawing board film screen for 200 people. I did this with a really wonderful group of people, including Tine Bernstoff-Agard, Laura Jeans, Aida Marone, Uri Wegman, Ben and Sebastian. And this project started in thinking about something that a great philosopher named Emmanuel Levinas had said. Levinas beautifully articulated the point that the most heightened sensation of the human condition occurs between two faces looking at each other in silence. And he talked about this as the beginning of empathy and ultimately the beginning of ethics. And the silence is kind of key because it's the idea of recognizing in an other's face the depth of humanity before it becomes codified in language. So I want to take you through this project in some detail. So this is the Levinas moment, right? Two faces looking at each other in silence. So we had a huge theater in Aarhus, and we built this enormous curved arc, this wall, and then we skinned it with paper. And then, can you see my mouse? You see these drawings over here? Okay, this was the first step. The first step was that I asked each of the individuals who were participating to go out into their town. Many of them lived in Aarhus their whole life. And to go to a location in the city that they had some kind of an emotive relationship with, some kind of memory, something happened there, someplace they identified. And I asked them to make a full-scale drawing capturing a piece of it. It was like 1 by 1.5 meter sheets or something like this. And some did rubbing, some did drawings, whatever they wanted, but I wanted them to capture that place and bring it to the theater. And so we had about 200 of these. You can see them, and we put them all around the walls on the outside. Oh, geez. Okay, so Then we paired people in groups of 2. And it was a very subtle but important question that we asked them. What it was is that this person, because one is on the inside of the wall, the other is on the outside of the wall. So her drawing, her capture moment is over here, right? Now she can't see it anymore, but he can, right? So there's a partnership between the 2 of them. And so what we did is we asked them that the one on the outside who could see the other's drawing had to reenact the drawing, meaning they could look at it and reenact it on the outside of the wall. And then try to whisper it through the wall to the person whose it was. Okay, so this part was called whispering through the walls. And it's, you can see it's really coming out of that Levinas. If you think of the Levinas quote about the space between 2 faces, and there's a very interesting aspect to it, which is there's an emotional interdependency, in the sense that everybody understood that drawing out there meant a lot to that person. So for her, that was a meaningful memory. And the person who can see it there's now, you can think of it as an ethical imperative, let's say, to try and communicate the other person's memory or emotion to them through the wall. And it led to all kinds of wild inventions. I mean, everything was possible, right? One guy had a parallel edge on one side, but it was controlled by the person on the other side. So as one moved the parallel edge, it moved his on the inside. They invented things that were rolling around the top of the wall, little cars and sticks and every possible way to whisper through the wall. And the urgency was real, in the sense that the hope of being able to communicate. And it was beautiful, because the opacity of the wall created this urgency for communication. Okay, then we introduced live feed film. So if you see here, this is a bank of projectors. And then you see this camera, the cameras were out here. I don't know if I have a great shot of that, but imagine around the outside of that arc, there are 6 really good cameras facing the outside wall of the arc, and each one of them is cued to one of these projectors on the inside. So whatever is happening out here is projected here, all the way around, in live time. So you get a live feed, inversion. You see, so here you can see, this is a woman who's on the outside of the arc, and she is trying to draw her piece. And it's kind of interesting. Sometimes I say it's like the 21st century Levinas, because she, if you think about it a second, the reason she's looking at her friend is actually because she's looking away from her friend. Because if you remember where the cameras and projectors are, right? As she turns her head back toward the drawing, she's looking at the camera, which on this side of the arc turns her head towards the person. It's a little tricky, but you're architects, I think you get it. What that allowed is a whole nother dimension of a lifetime communication. I'm going to show you a few quick films, because something remarkable started to happen. This is them drawing together in live time.
Her and her shadow.
Here's a detail. So they literally could work together from opposite sides of the wall. Now, in terms of the architectonics of curiosity, after a few days of being in this environment, you literally start to inhabit it. It's difficult to explain, but it kind of, the facts of the technology go away, and you literally get very attuned to the spatial condition that you're in and the kinds of communication that can happen, and you actually start to be able to invent all kinds of things that we could never imagine. This is one of my favorite little clips. These two guys, you know, literally playing with the wall. Yeah. He's on the outside, obviously, but there's a moment that happens. You got to watch. Now, you notice something, is he threw that cup through the hole and it came out the hole. Now, what I mean is he threw it through the image of the hole. You see? Because when you're living in it, and by the way, this is the experience of being there. It's not just because you're watching a film of it. When you're actually there, you know, this is the hole, but this is the physical hole. And it's because the cameras and projectors, maybe, you know, they just slightly cracked, you know, they're a little tiny bit off, but from his perspective, it becomes really interesting because he's watching him throw it through there, and you can notice that he's kind of surprised that it comes out over here, right? Because it all becomes this kind of environment that's mingling the physical and the image, and you know, and you eventually start to just explore new ways of communicating. And this is one more moment I want to show from this project. It, you know, eventually that kind of embodied experience of people's questions, exploring communication, exploring the potentiality of it, leads to a kind of performative experience. And I work a lot with improvisational theater because, and this was 200 architecture students. They had not had a lot of experience in improvisational theater, but it becomes a way of developing communication. So eventually we invited like the whole town, and we did this really beautiful performance at the end with the arc. And this is a moment you have to look closely, because in this circle, you will see there's a woman here pushing. So it's, now, to me, there's a kind of emotive precision in that moment that I really wanted to share, where over time, this question that we started with of the interdependency between the people brings a kind of precision. And, you know, as you can probably put together, you know, that woman pushing with that piano, she's not actually there, right? She's elsewhere, because of how that crack I showed you between the film and the room. But the pressure of the image and the pressure of the elsewhere was really part of it. It's a kind of eclipse in the Ahus Arc. I think there's a lot of lessons in the idea that our poetic imagination and our emotional precisions are quite crucial to our stories and spaces, to what's shared between us. This was an early project of Arts, Letters, and Numbers, and it led to many, many more. In fact, in some ways, this project really led to the founding of what we do up at Arts, Letters, and Numbers. And I'm going to show more of that later, but it opened up, oops. Oh, geez. This opened up all kinds of questions about disciplines, about human interaction, about communication. It led to thinking about the idea that disciplines themselves are in communication with each other, that they transform each other. Sometimes I say that they transform relationally, right? Meaning, you know, there's a principle in phenomenology that we don't experience things, we experience relationships, right? Meaning that all experience is relational. And I've spent a fair amount of time working on the idea that disciplines themselves transform relationally, and eventually getting to these large ideas about gatherings of disciplines and, into institutions, and thinking of them as disciplinary geographies, right? Like in architecture, we talk a lot about topography and geography. And what if we think about disciplinary geographies, meaning multiple forms of knowledge, multiple forms of thinking, multiple forms of acting. And the idea that these disciplinary geographies are dynamic, right? They're not fixed in there. As we know, institutions love to silo all their disciplines into separate categories and literally separate spaces, which really drives me nuts. But they're transforming. And so building, creating linkages, creating situations of proximity and interaction among a giant diversity of disciplines. To me, this undoubtedly leads to new questions, to new thought processes. And I would argue, in fact, to new forms of knowledge, right? That knowledge itself evolves through the relational interaction of multiple disciplines. So I want to show you another project. This is a project that I did at Brown University. I did this with Diana Mangasser. And I did this very soon after the Ahus Arc. I was a visiting artist there, I think maybe the next year. And you can see these two arcs here, right? It's a smaller scale, but there are two arcs and they're back to back. They're sort of facing each other. And I'm going to show you what we did. Oh, and I want to start, there's a very short 30-second film clip that I want to share because it helps us think about what we were trying to do. The project at Brown is called Exquisite Broken Circle. That's the name of it. And I'll say more about it in a second, but I just want to show this short 30-second clip. This was done by a woman named Ali Peoples. She was a student of mine at RISD maybe 15, 20 years ago. I'll just show it and then say a little bit about it. I just love this clip. You see, that's Ali right there with her film camera. And so in some sense, it's a very simple interaction of two instruments. By the way, coming face to face, right? Like the Levinas. In this case, it's a still camera, the Polaroid camera, and the film camera. Now, these two instruments have enough in common and enough difference that they can reveal something about each other, right? Both of these capture light in time. Photography does this in still time, and the film camera does this in durational time through, motion pictures. So it's the proximity of what they have in common and the distance of their differences that allow something to emerge between the two. In fact, within this interaction, something is revealed about time itself, because wish you were here. That is a wish, because you see, she can never be here because here in that interaction happened about 5 minutes ago. All right, so there's a crack in time. All right, I wish you were here. So because the moment captured when she's holding that sign, which is what the still photograph captures, is frozen in time. The still photograph is frozen in time in a past moment. And the film camera that she's holding in her other hand, it keeps filming. So it's moving forward into the future, right? And as the photograph develops and the image appears, the film catches up to the past moment, revealing her wish. Now, it's in this very elemental sense, the proximity and interaction of these two instruments contains a riddle, right? the interaction is both navigating and creating transformation. It's doing both at the same time. So I want you to keep that in mind. And I'm going to show you this project at Brown. As I said, it's called Exquisite Broken Circle. And it was, some of you may have heard of an exquisite corpse. You know, it's something that the surrealists would do with drawing. They would also do it with writing. It's a very interesting thing. What I was trying to do here was create an exquisite, a disciplinary exquisite corpse. Okay, so the setup is this. I hope you can see this drawing. Instead of the one big arc, there's two arcs, one here and one here. And here, on each side, there's one camera, right? So this is camera one, and it's absorbing the inside of that surface. And then its projector is over here. And so it's projecting here what's happening here. And then the same in reverse. Camera two is absorbing here, and it's projecting here. Okay, let that sink in a second, because what you realize is when it's all set up and the computers are turned on, everything's working, it's basically a kind of hum. It's like a white on white, like Malevich's white on white, right? Because there's nothing there. They're just absorbing and projecting the silent white surface of the paper. But then, if something enters, right? So we had a violinist enter, and I'm going to show you images in a second, but just while we have the plan, I want to show you. When a violinist enters physically, her image is projected here. But that image is then absorbed by this camera and projected back here. So it's a mirror to infinity. I'm sure you all know that, right? You take two mirrors, it becomes a mirror to infinity. It's a mirror to infinity, but it has a crack, which is the introduction of the physical human. So we took that as a site. Okay, I'm talking about sites to inhabit our questions. This was a situation or a site that we built in order to create an architectonics, literally an architectonics of curiosity. Now, what happened, is we had a violinist enter, and then we had an actor on the other side who was miming the violinist by watching her, but without a violin. And then we had people come in and they were drawing. Oh, something went wrong with my. Are you guys still there? Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, because my screen just went weird. They're drawing the actor. And then we had dancers come, and they were trying to dance the drawings. So the point is, it's a handoff. You see, it's an exquisite corpse, but done through disciplines. All right, I'm gonna show you a very short clip.
Enter the earth, and their sound fills the whole, and their image appears here. Then we had actors watching, reenacting the violinist, reenacting their movements, but with no violin. Then we had people drawing, coming into the arts and trying to capture the actors with drawing. Some of these people were dancing. They were trying to dance the movements of the drawings. So it was a kind of exquisite corpse, like the surrealists with the writings and drawings, but this one was an embodied exquisite corpse. People were handing off and moving through a number of different modes of expression.
Oh. Okay, I know I'm moving quick, but because I don't want to go too far over time, so I'm going to keep going. I want to. This is a project called A Model of Education, and it has to do with many things about life, about the social poetics of architecture, the social contract of architecture. And, you know, so I have to share a little bit of a context for this model. You know, I've been teaching at Cooper Union for over 30 years. It really gave me my life. You know, I was the craziest lucky duck. You know, when I graduated from Cooper, John Haydock, my teacher and mentor, asked me to stay and teach with him. And he gave me a room in the place, and I was drawing and writing and working with John for 10 years. I was his associate dean, and then after John passed, I was the acting dean, and that community is very unique, and it means the world to me. I'm still there. I'm the director of interdisciplinary learning. We had a real rupture. Some of you may or may not have heard, but we had a battle probably 7-8 years ago now for the life of the school, because Cooper Union is unique in the United States in the fact that it was the only free school in the country. Long story there. I'm not going to go into all the details, but Peter Cooper was a real visionary, and he removed all the barriers to education at a time when the barriers were very serious. I mean, this is a time when children did not go to grammar school unless they were rich. Grammar school wasn't free. Can you imagine? And Peter Cooper in 1859 made a college free and open to all races, all religion, all genders. It was completely radical. Anyway, about 7-8 years ago, we went into a serious battle to save the school because a lot of people, board members, the president at that time, wanted to charge tuition. And it's a very complex story. But the reason that I had to bring it up is it was gut-wrenching, and we didn't back up. And ultimately, we won. I mean, I'm not going to go into all the details. We won in the sense that we did get them out of our community, the people who were doing that. And we have a great president now, and we're working. We have leadership who is really committed to returning the school to free, and we're going to get there. But it was at least a 4-year battle. And New York is a tough town for these kinds of battles. So it was a New York street fight to try and save the school from these forces and save the vision and mission of the school. So in the middle of that, you know, I ran the first year architecture studio at Cooper for 20 years. And every year with the team that I was teaching with, this year I had the year I'm going to show you is 2014. I was teaching with Rike Jorgensen and Wes Rosen. We had a great team. And every year we try to find what's the question that we want to inhabit, right? What do we have to ask this year relative to the incoming class? You know, there's 30 new people, they're walking in the door. And we work on it. I mean, like an architecture project, the Architectonics, right? We find the spatial situation of the question. Now, this particular year that I want to share with you was extremely challenging because this was the first year that the Cooper Union was charging tuition in its 160-year history. Now, imagine if every year we take seriously, like, what's the question of this moment? Holy cow, right? What do we do? Because it was complex. We wanted those students to know that that Peter Cooper's invitation to them was still the same. Just because this crazy people came in and tried to break that promise didn't mean that Peter Cooper wasn't making his promise. We wanted them to know they were just as much Cooper as anybody else. And we also wanted to address the moment in the city. And meaning, as I said, you know, we were, I could do a whole talk just on this. We were in a battle, and I was very vocal in that. And so we wanted New York to speak to the other, let's say, cultural institutions in New York City that Cooper Union is a part of, and bring this question forward. So I'm going to share with you a film that we made that year. Now, there's one other thing I want to share briefly before that, because it had a significant impact. When we were doing that wrestling in the summer, what do we do with this class, you know? This little fragment of a story came in and had an impact, which when you see the film will be, I think, hopefully obvious. So it's a brief moment from a novel by Mark Helprin. And the novel is called Winter's Tale. And in it, the main character, Peter Lake, lives in New York City. And he lives in 2 times. It's kind of a magical novel. He lives in 1900 and he lives in 2000. At the, and the novel goes back and forth between these 2 times that he's living in. How he does this is a kind of astounding work of literature. And it's hinted at in the beginning of the book. The book opens with a large passenger ship entering New York City harbor in 1900. And it's heading towards Ellis Island. Peter Lake is an infant. He's a small baby. And just as the ship enters New York City waters, it hits something. It's like struck and it starts to sink, and it's a tragedy, and everybody's in panic and they're running everywhere. And Peter Lake's parents run to the captain's quarters. They had been there at some point, and they had seen this. There's a large model of the ship itself. There was a model of the ship in the captain's quarters in a big glass vitrine. And they go in and they shatter the glass and they take the model out. It's like 4-meter long model of the ship. And they take the top off and they put baby Peter Lake in the model. And then as the ship goes under, they send the model off into the waters of the harbor, and Peter Lake enters New York. So, this, of course, it marks the beginning of a new era. It's a hinge moment, old world, new world. But the reason I want to point it out is that in that moment, the model or the double enters the world, and it begins to float in the real waters of life. You see, meaning a model, think of an idea, like a model of education, starts to create its own buoyancy. Right? At that point, it's a question: is that a small ship? Is it like a little canoe, or is it a model? And that transformation, right, of the old world transforms through a model or an idea that brings us to a new world. Okay, that became the sort of driver for this project. So I'm going to show you this film. Oh, there's a few still images. All right. Yeah, okay. It's the only way to really explain the project is this film. It's about 6 minutes, I think.
2nd, 1859. Originally published in Cooper Union Tracts, November 2nd, 1860. After the introductory lecture to the course of scientific instruction by Dr. John W. Draper, Mr. Peter Cooper, being called upon by the audience, made the following remarks. It is, my friends, at all times difficult to speak with strict propriety of matters pertaining to oneself. The occasion that has brought us together is one on which my mind has dwelt with long and anxious hope. It is now my privilege and joy to welcome the youth of this city and country to all the benefits and privileges of this institution. It will be, my friends, entirely out of my power to give you any clear idea of the labor and efforts that have been required to obtain the means necessary for the erection of this building. A building now entirely devoted, with all its rents and revenues, of a birth name in nature to the advancement of science and art. This building has scarcely been absent from my thoughts a single day for nearly 30 years. Labored for it by night and by day with an intensity of desire that can never be explained. It is now my fervent hope that the youth of my native city and country will constantly throng these halls with eager efforts to gain that kind of useful knowledge which is needed to make them wise, good, and useful to themselves and to their country. I trust that all the youth of our city and country will all realize that this institution has been organized for their special use and improvement, and I trust that they will rally around and protect it and make it like a city set on a hill that cannot be hid. You, my young friends, are now more deeply interested to care for and to use this building wisely and well than I, by possibility, can be. My time in the course of nature is rapidly drawing to a close. While you may have many long years to enjoy the benefits of this institution, or to suffer the consequences of the neglect to improve the opportunities here offered, as this building has been erected solely for your advancement in science and art.
Okay, so you can see why showing the film was really the only way to share that one. You know, it of course, the buoyancy of a model of education in the real waters of life. Also, that this was an act of architecture in the city. This was an actual an architectural gesture. And it speaks to the fact that that the spatial imagination, the poetic imagination, as dimensions of human life, as dimensions of the city, and that there's a language, let's say, of empathy, of difference, and that can include our nuanced fragilities in our shared stories. Meaning, there's a social political dimension to this idea. I often think that the spatial or poetic imagination is perhaps the most pragmatic means of addressing our social political lives. And that has to do with comprehension and understanding, right? To comprehend this fragile globe. The poetic imagination, I would say, produces oxygen within the fibers of our social contract. And to me, that moment was quite crucial because it was real, it was in the city, it was actual politics happening in the city. You know, we obviously, and the students, by the way, drove most of it. They decided we're going to the New York Public Library. The New York Public Library being one of the other great institutions of free education in New York City. All right, I'm gonna move quick. The last project I wanna show is some work that we did. I want to share some work that we done at Arts, Letters, and Numbers. You know, as I mentioned, the Ahus Arc was the beginning of Arts, Letters, and Numbers, and I just want to share a couple of pieces from that. You know, if you pile dirt and rocks on paper, and if you leave it overnight, and it rains, and then if you carefully lift it, you get the sun. Right? So the earth and the rain make a drawing of the sun. This was a work done at Arts, Letters, Numbers. Arts, Letters, Numbers is a nonprofit arts and education organization that I founded about 10 years ago with a wonderful group of people from all over the world. And we did this with a sense of urgency. Urgency for what is possible when new structures and spaces for interaction and creative exchange across a very wide range of disciplines and ways of knowing, modes of expression, action, when they're brought together. And we collaborate with, and we hold workshops in educational and cultural institutions worldwide. We have an ongoing series of educational workshop sessions, residencies, music, theater performances, events, exhibitions, film productions at our Mill campus in upstate New York. And I'll say one of the hopes, missions of Arts, Letters, and Numbers is to create circumstance of a giant diversity of ways of knowing brought into direct proximity, brought into direct interaction. So disciplinary diversity, of course, many of us talk about interdisciplinary, right? But cultural diversity, age diversity, biodiversity, gender, race, socioeconomic diversity. So think of it as a kind of microclimate, like the Amazon, right? Galapagos, of diverse voices, forms of agency, broadening the spectrum of experiences, right? In some sense, the hope is that there's a living system, like in the Galapagos, let's say, of knowledge transformation, right? The evolution of knowledge. Now, at Arts, Letters, and Numbers, we often create spaces of interaction through the dynamic structures of questions. Okay, and this is really the heart of this idea of an architectonics of curiosities, the structure of questions, shared questions. And I'll give you an example. If you ask a physicist about light, they may say it's the structure of their work, right? If you ask a photographer about light, they'll say, well, come on, it's the very substance and structure of my work. If you ask a painter about light, they'll say something similar. An astronomer, it's the material. A filmmaker, a biologist, an architect, if they're a good architect, will say, well, yeah, it's all about light. Solar engineer, right? It goes on and on and on. All will say something about light as the structure of their work. And this, of course, makes sense because we've been in conversation with the sun for billions of years. Now, while a painter, a filmmaker, a physicist may all see light as the very structure and fiber of their work, it's quite interesting that light for a filmmaker and for a painter may be understood as fundamentally different, not to mention for a physicist. So each summer, we have our summer programs with an astounding group of people from all over the world, and we have shared questions and works. So over the years, our summer programs, we've had well over 300 people from over 40 countries and as many disciplines. Just to give a hint, in a matter of weeks at Arts, Letters, and Numbers, we might have actors, architects, mimes, neurologists, filmmakers, physicists, mathematicians, musicians, welders, writers, policymakers, chefs, dancers, attorneys, and painters, and performance artists, magicians, surgeons, and lots of poets, lots and lots of poets. And together we ask and inhabit shared questions, and we co-construct works. And in one of our early workshops at the Mill, it was called Circling Towards a Disciplinary Chora. The idea of a chora from theater, a disciplinary one. And we started with a series of questions about the dynamic interaction of disciplines and ways of building new linkages between them. We asked, what if we could build a bridge? Build a bridge, but one that is between disciplines. So a bridge that is a stage, that is a drawing board, that is a film screen, all at the same time. And we said, how do we do that? I mean, actually construct that bridge, right? Well, first we have to dig holes for footings, right? It requires excavation. And then we have to pour foundations, we have to raise a structure, and then a new horizon. So we set out in these steps of construction. We started to dig, and we kept digging, and then we started to discover things. And all of this is a shared embodied experience by everybody who's there. And we started to discover and play. And then this was about a 2-week period of digging. We asked a simple and powerful question. What is excavation in drawing? What is excavation in writing? What is excavation in film? You see? Right? So everybody is sharing this experience for about half the day of digging from all different disciplines. And then we're asking, what is excavation in acting? And then we're actually pouring the footings. People are learning how to mix concrete, pour footings, foundations, right? We're asking, what are foundations in acting? What are foundations in film? What are foundations in drawing? These are strings hanging. Interesting question about foundations in drawing. And then we get to structure, right? We're raising the structure. And of course, imagine the classic question, right? What is structure in drawing? What is structure in writing, right? It's one of the greats, right? What is structure in acting? And then, of course, the question of a new horizon, right? Of a bridge, of raising this structure as this kind of connective tissue between us. So what I wanted to share with this is the unfolding or blossoming of new questions and new works that emerge in running after the unknown, in running after what we don't know, but doing it in this kind of microclimate of many ways of knowing. You see, because ultimately there is the possibility to enter our questions, and in the right situations, I would say to live within them, right? Meaning to discover an architecture within us that is in direct communication with the spaces and structures between us. Discover our shared stories that include our individual nuances. And this opens up the possibility of our spaces of education as sites of exploration, as spaces of deep communicative exchange, with the capacity to at once situate our individual imaginations and construct spaces between us and our works, between us and each other, between us and our binding together our larger humanity. So at Arts, Letters, and Numbers, we're constantly searching for evidence of ourselves in our images, excavating to find the still lives that inhabit life, to find the breath of our haunting artifices. Levitating to construct new connective tissues, putting on our dresses of language to discover a certain kind of wedding, dancing with our doubles, spreading the gravel, raising the suns, raising walls, and then dancing with them, swinging with them, sailing with them, sharing stories around a table, lighting fires and looking for their foundations, going to the edge and holding each other up, finding our footings, our weights and measures, our music, cooking up our tables, drawing out our still lives, searching for the shadow of one sphere projected upon another, inhabiting both at the same time, finding our feet, finding the sail that was a veil between the sun and the sun, listening to the breath of a torch, to the sounds of the stage, always listening to the fragile fibers of our ethics and poetics, listening for the sonship, for the arc that makes the flood possible. Thank you. Wow, there's a lot of people here. That was fun. I enjoyed that. I hope I did not go on too long. I was trying to keep pace, but and I would love to have a conversation. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. What a super inspiring lecture. I would have loved to study at Cooper Union, and you know, the kind of physical aspect of studying architecture. I think that's extremely inspiring. Really fantastic. Patrick, do you want to respond, or do you want to hand over the word to Hero or Peter? Maybe you guys have a response. I'm not sure how easy it is to respond to this wealth of information, but I'm sure you can.
Sure. I think maybe we could give it the floor to Hero or Peter first, and we'll invite some questions.
Well, I think rather than making comments, I think I would actually ask a question, especially going back to the beginning statement that David mentioned, that drawing the curiosity is pre-linguistics. I think this kind of resonate a lot to me, because in my PhD study, I did actually study language, I mean the word. I studied Japanese architects' use of onomatopoeia, which is a sort of a language at the words before the word, so-called. You know, it's a very infant language, which kind of a lot to do with kind of excavating Japanese architects' feeling of it before they really conceptualize things. And so it's really your term, this the drawing of curiosity is the pre-linguistic, kind of resonate me with that. And then my question comes in, because I studied this specific words onomatopoeia previously, and then it's about linkage to the language anyway. So is this the drawing out of curiosity? You talk about the pre-linguistic, it's kind of privileges the drawings, meaning that it's something specific to drawing. You kind of privilege the drawing because you think it links to the architectonics. So that's my question.
No, it's really, really important stuff. I'm so glad you bring it up. I mean, I'm going to say a couple of different things. First, I want to say I love language, and when I engage in these things, I'm certainly not banishing language. I find language to be one of the great mysteries of life. But at the same time, I recognize that there are enormous territories of question, you know, that need silence, that prefigure language or circumscribe language, right? And it's in some sense very obvious why. It's something we forget. It's so obvious we forget it. We are a body. We often say, I have a body, right? You know, my leg hurts, or my voice is getting tired, right? Meaning we take possession of our body with language. Now, but we are a body. Now, we are a body with a great propensity to take possession of itself with language. And there is not a conflict there. I don't see, it's like the heart and the lungs there's no conflict of interest between the heart and the lungs. They're working together. And I believe it's quite similar with language and the body. But I think that remembering that we are a body helps us engage, you know, millions of years of knowledge, of biological evolution, of transformation of the body. And I bring a lot of that kind of questioning of being a body and having a body to drawing. And I would say that drawings have quite a similar relationship. And what I mean is, you know, I often say a drawing can be of something, but it always is something. So you can make a drawing of a house, you can make a drawing of a bear, you can make a drawing of a tree, meaning it can contain an ofness, which is of course the language, right? It's representation, and we can recognize or remember, right? All the re's in the world, the drawing through all kinds of mysteries about cognition and perception and the visual cortex and where language lives, etc. But the drawing is something. It's substance, it's paper, it's carbon, it's charcoal, it's, you know, space. And so I'm often working with the idea, I'll give you one more link between the body and drawing. All of these are mysterious, right? I'm making these sounds right now, right? And oddly enough, across all this space and time, and probably a dozen mother tongues in the room, it's working, right? So language is a deep mystery itself, that it's an agreement that allows us to disagree, right? It's a framework, right? We have a shared framework, but it doesn't mean we have to agree on what, you know, is the expression of that framework. So it itself is a mystery. And then we introduce voice. And by that, I mean me speaking right now, these sounds that I'm making. That is a mingling of breath, right? I'm breathing, and the vocal cords and the throat and the tongue. Imagine everything going on. I often talk with people about the fact that drawing is a similar mingling, meaning when the of the drawing and the is of the drawing, the is in this case is my breath, right? And that's why, I am no singer, but if you know Nick Cave, or Willie Nelson, or Bob Marley, what they're doing with their voice is much more than if you read the lyrics. So the aspiration of drawing, I think, can be at the same level, where the mingling or resonance between the syntax, the notation, the representation of the of a drawing, and its isness, then the drawing can take on a voice. We can actually hear and inhabit the spatial voices of drawing. And I believe that can really dramatically amplify the relationship between a person and their work. I think as educators, that's our ultimate goal. My primary objective, I do a lot of crazy things. People are always like, what are you doing? I think that the relationships that people build with their work, whether it's drawing or writing or music or what, their studio, them in their studio, the intimacy of that. I mean, it really has to be like old friends, you and your work talking to each other, whispering, like all of the kind of level of intimacy that we have with dear friends. And so the voice piece is crucial to it. Oh, one last thing, and then I'm going to stop because I know I tend to go on too long. Remember, we're architects. Space, it's incredibly literate. Space completes us, right? I mean, there's a spatial literacy, and ultimately a spatial literature to architecture. But remember, it's primarily silent in its speech. And what I mean is, it's not using words. It's communicating in all kinds of other ways with our bodies. And so that's why, certainly, and I would say in all disciplines, remembering that we are a body is crucial. But in architecture, it's unbelievably important, because if we limit our aspiration for our architecture to what we can say, like they often like, why don't you tell us what you're doing? If we limit our questions to what we could put in words, an enormous amount of the spatial communication and reciprocity between us and our spaces is kind of removed off the table. It goes over there, So anyway, silence, space speaks silence. Being an architect is to author silence, which does not mean nothing. So thank you for the question. It's really spot on.
Thank you, David.
Hi, David. This is Peter. Great. I mean, really one of the most riveting and kind of breathtaking lectures I've seen for a long time.
Oh,
but I would like to kind of talk you through what happened to me. I was watching you, and your background was changing from pitch black to dark blue to a wonderful sky behind you. And at the same time, you were talking to me or talking to us about time and its relationship. And it got me like, and I was looking at you intensely, and the sky kept changing, but it was very gradual. And I think that was kind of had to be added to this experience. And then I'll just take you through a series of paradoxes that kind of made me think about what you were saying. First of all, it was this relationship between the camera and the Polaroid that you showed, and it then got me thinking, what's going on there? And then the second project, you show a model on a school, and in the two of them, there's time involved. But there are different types of time. And especially the model of the school that goes around, kind of in a kind of way made me think of all the negotiation that the students had to sort of think about, because there's one thing building it, but there's the negotiation. It's got to fit into the lift, it's got to come out of the lift, it's got to be able to move. And all of a sudden I was just thinking, this is actually Hong Kong. The architecture that you are describing is the architecture that happens in Hong Kong. There's these moving temporary pieces of architecture that exist that nobody kind of sees because we're blind to them. And maybe I'm attracted to them because I'm not from here. And so in a way, I was thinking, you're making something that in a way is informing what architecture is, because the facade is no longer a facade in that model. The facade is like it's not even a window. It's something that creates a different type of space. It's a different type of boundary, a boundary that is constantly changing. Anyway, there's many things that were happening, and then all of a sudden, I had to kind of write a map of what was going on because I was thinking too much. And then it all dawned to me that everything that you spoke to tonight, to me, resonates with one word. And I would like you, I was wondering if this word resonates with you. It's traces. And what does this word of trace mean to you? Sorry for the complicated question.
Absolutely fantastic question. And I think, thank you. Really, very beautiful. I'm just very quickly, I want to touch on some of the things you said about that model. I think you're absolutely right. The real, I mean, it was some miracle. I mean, it was a mysterious thing that we even pulled that off. You understand? That was 15 weeks. It wasn't even a whole year. It was a semester. And I don't say that like to brag. I say that because the urgency felt, because obviously what we were doing, and I'm very proud of the fact that in that one we nailed it, is I grew up at Cooper. I mean, I've been there since I was 19. And it broke my heart what had happened. And I didn't want that group to feel excluded from this giant promise of Peter Cooper and the social contract of the Cooper Union. And so what we were doing was everything is with the city, and it also had to do with them feeling the weight and responsibility of that institution, right? Meaning, I joke, but no third-year student was going to tell them they're not real Cooper because somehow they had to pay, because they built the school, literally, like they built that model, right? And so when we were doing it, there was this unbelievable collaborative negotiation of the challenges. Week after week, I mean, by day 2, we were already at top speed because it was the only way we were going to get there. And then the porosity, by the way, what you said about the facade, that was one of the key kind of moments, is realizing, Peter Cooper's vision of removing barriers to education meant that the facade was not only porous, but then the added challenge of it unhinging, and this all happened in the first weeks as we were wrestling with opening the barriers, all that. And they built all those hinges. I mean, they just went wild. And so, I believe in students and I trust in students. I always say your voices, the student's voice, is the key. And there is so much more to come. There's so much more to do, and it will come from you, from the students, because so when it came to time to decide, like, where do we go? Even that, it seems like a small detail, but you can imagine, I mean, just as a little detail, there was a lawsuit going on. We sued the school, and it was taken by the Supreme Court of New York State. And so you can imagine, like, going down to the Supreme Court was also on the list, like, because it was an active political situation in the city. There were lots of debates, but really, to their credit, the teachers didn't say where to go. We said, it's your to figure out. And so they went to Abraham Lincoln in Union Square. They went up to where John Haydock had built the Conciliator in front of the Flatiron. And then they went up to the public library. I'm talking about the trust in their understanding of the social cultural geography of the city. So traces. I don't mean this in a spooky way, but I often think about ghosts, right? Traces and ghosts. You know, one of John Haydock's great projects called Victims, and it really does have to do with the relationship between traces and ghosts. And I don't say that like, oh, let's believe or not in ghosts. I don't mean that. I mean, I'm talking like technically. You know, I often think of an eclipse, you know, like a solar lunar eclipse. You know, an eclipse is the shadow of one world made present in another. Right? You know, there's these different worlds, and then the absence or shadow of one world made present in another. And I think that ghosts are the same. I mean, culturally defined. It doesn't matter if you've seen one or not, or believe in them or not. That's not the point. The point is, you know, if you're here, you're here. If you're gone, you're gone. If you're gone and here, you're a ghost. So it's the shadow of one world made present in another. I actually believe that architecture, through drawing and ultimately through the city, is engaged in that kind of question, because buildings have a different lifespan, a different time frame than us. And so there are all kinds of silent communications that are going on across time through space. And you know, every city has that, you know, different in every city, obviously, right? I mean, the difference between, you know, you take 10 world cities or 10 ancient cities, and you can really do a whole deep questioning of what are traces in relation to the present tense. And last thing I want to say on that is, you know, I often say that the students are the curriculum, and the neighborhood or the city is the school. And I say that because I'm talking about curiosity. I'm going back to this question of the architectonics of curiosity. I think as teachers, we're also students, right? The arts of teaching and learning are listening arts. And our ability to create situations, and I do, as you can see, I mean spatial, and I also mean tone, I mean atmosphere, I mean embracing difference of voice, where it's just younger and older people, you know, and younger people where their questions, their curiosity, their voices are actually embraced, actually come out and become. That's why I always say the students of the curriculum, because their interests, what they're curious about, has to be what we're running after together. And that's another kind of trace. I mean that. It's another way of understanding what education is all about.
Thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful thoughts, Peter.
Thank you, David.
Well, thank you. That was a very elaborate response. I have one more question in the chat for you, if you have another few minutes, and I think after that we will round it off, because I'm sure it's day and you need to indeed move on. I totally agree with Peter that kind of that progression of the very dark sky until this beautiful background is fantastic, and is very nice, exciting background to your story. So one of our students, I think, or Julian Chen, he asked, can you define architectonic curiosity in a few sentences? What is architectonic curiosity? Thank you.
Well, yes, and the only reason I can do it as succinct is because of the things we just talked about. I think that when I say we are a body, and we're a body with a great propensity to say I have a body, right? So we're this double body, right? There's at least a couple of I's in the sentence I. That body is in space. and the communicative exchanges between us and space are quite intense. Sometimes I do very slow experiments up, up at ALN. We might spend a half a day just engaging in silence the communications going on between our body and the chair we're sitting in or the floor that we're laying on, right? There's an enormous amount of communication. And if you actually slow down, you start to register all kinds of things that that our normal sort of fast-moving analytic mind misses, and in fact often erases. So when you work with that, you get to a point to understand that it really matters. The spatial situation you're in dramatically transforms your questions, like what you're trying to ask. I mean, simple like sitting and drawing is different than standing and drawing, like very, very, very elemental, right? If many people 100, 200 years ago would read and write standing up, right? 200 years ago, sitting at a desk to read and write was not what people did. They would stand because they believed being erect when reading and writing was important to your mind, okay? So that's just a little hint. I think if you saw some of the images I showed when I was going through art, source, and numbers at the end, we take that quite far, right? So this is to say that the same way that we work in architecture, in the details, in the structure, in whatever you're looking at, whether it's Mies or Korb or Wren or whatever you're looking at, right? People are working on the architectonics of constructing buildings. I think we can do the similar work with our spaces of education. When we go to make a studio, right? We say we're going to do this project, right? I'm working on and developing that the space of that studio has as much an impact on the voices and questions and curiosities of the students as anything we would ever hope architecture to do. You see? So the point is, and I'll get one little example. I don't know if you looked at Mies van der Rohe, but if like when I was a kid, we all learned the Mies corner, the famous Mies corner, right? And you see it in the Seagrams, you see it all over, right? And it's the absent corner, the I-beams come along and then the last bit isn't built, right? It's absent, and it's absent because it's built in the mind, right? Mies understood that the 90-degree corner is built in your mind. For me, in the Ahus Arc, that inversion where I can't see my drawing, but you can, and you are going to reenact it to care for me, right? I want to, for a second, say what the mistake I could have made is if I reversed that. If I said, okay, now I want you to draw your drawing to tell the other person you're drawing. That's not what I said. I said, you have to care for the person to tell them their memory or emotion, right? That little difference, that's an architectonics of curiosity, because it's like a Mies corner, right? Mies could have built the corner. It wouldn't be what it became. And to me, in each of these situations, I'm working on a kind of structural syntactical architectonics to draw out people's curiosities. So that's what, the brown one all through, each one is an architectonic. So I hope that helped. It was not the 1 or 2 sentences you asked for.
I think that's a better 2 sentences that we than we asked for.
Thank you.
Really, yeah, fantastic. I will keep that in mind, that Mies corner, and indeed how we can communicate without actually communicating, right? It's or without at least without saying everything. I think that's the exciting part. I will close it off here. We could have listened a little bit more, but everybody is, I think, is really fulfilled. Thank you so much for joining us at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Thank you everybody for joining us today, whether it's your morning, noon, or night. great to have you all. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks from now. Also, David, you're most welcome to join us if you would wake up again very early. Thank you, Patrick, for organizing. Thank you, Leon, for joining. And thank you also to Hero and Peter for responding. It was very, very great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day and great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.
All right. Hope to see you again.